I'll never forget the way his hands trembled when he passed me that AC $20,000 check. His name was Henry Whitmore, 84 years old, sitting quietly in the back seat of my battered 2014 Honda Civic, the one that smelled like damp soil and faded dreams from the landscaping business I'd poured my life into. The rain that night in Chicago came down in waves, hammering against the glass like the world was testing me, daring me to keep going. My wipers screeched across the windshield, barely keeping up. "You remind me of someone I lost," he said softly, pressing a sleek business card into my palm. His hands were thin and cold, shaking slightly from age or emotion, I couldn't tell which. But his eyes were what stopped me. They were the kind that carried decades of love, guilt, and something unsaid. For a brief second, the entire world went quiet. It felt like time itself paused, like both our lives had somehow led to that exact moment. I didn't know why, but I felt it deep in my bones. 12 hours later, Henry was gone. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The call came early the next morning. I was half asleep in my car when my phone buzzed. "Mr. Mercer? This is Gregory Langston, attorney for Mr. Henry Whitmore. Could you come by my office today? There's something you need to hear." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a high-rise downtown office, leather chairs, marble floors, glass walls that looked over the river. It didn't feel real. That's when Gregory told me that Henry had died peacefully in his sleep that night, and had changed his will hours before his death. "He left you $87 million, he said calmly, like it was just another Tuesday morning. My mouth went dry. My hands went cold. I couldn't breathe. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in that chair crying, hard. Like I hadn't since my grandmother passed when I was 5. A security guard rushed in thinking I was having a heart attack. But it wasn't my body breaking, it was everything inside me. Because when Gregory read Henry's letter, the reason behind what he'd done, it tore through me like lightning. It wasn't random. Henry hadn't just been a kind stranger. He was connected to me in ways I could never have imagined. 6 months earlier, I'd been sleeping in that same Civic in the parking lot behind a Target off Ashland Avenue. My name's Ethan Mercer, 38 years old, former owner of Mercer Landscaping and Design, a business my father, Tom, started with nothing but a rusted pickup and an old push mower back in '95. We'd built it into something real. At our peak, we had 14 employees, contracts with golf clubs, estate owners, and even the city parks department. My younger brother Caleb handled the equipment and maintenance while I managed the clients. We were proud. We were family. Until I ruined everything. The expansion deal that I thought would make us millionaires went bad. I borrowed too much, trusted the wrong partner, and within a year, everything crumbled. Caleb lost his savings, his home equity, and his trust in me. When I called him, he didn't answer. When I showed up at his place, he told me, "Ethan, you didn't just lose a business. You lost my kid's future, and my faith in you as a brother." Those words cut deeper than any debt collector's threat. My dad, Tom, kept calling too, but he was gentler. He'd leave voicemails pretending I was doing him a favor. "Son, I've got too much cash sitting around. Could you help me put it to work?" He wanted to help, but I was too proud to say yes. I'd rather sit in my car eating cold beans from a can than admit defeat. The Uber app became my lifeline. Every ping meant maybe, just maybe, I'd make enough for gas, food, or a shower at the truck stop. Some days it was $30, others $60. Every night, I'd park behind the same store, recline my seat, and stare at the cracked ceiling of my car. The steering wheel became my desk. The trunk, my storage room. That Civic was my world. My ex-wife, Mara, had left a year earlier. She'd moved back to Texas with our 7-year-old daughter, Penny. Before she left, she said something that still haunts me. "You'd rather drown alone than ask for help." She wasn't wrong. I used to visit Penny once a month, when I could afford the gas. I'd tell her I was between jobs, that Daddy was just on a new adventure. She'd smile, and I'd pretend everything was fine. But truthfully, I'd never felt more like a failure. That October morning, I was running on 3 hours of sleep. The rain hadn't stopped since 4 a.m., and the temperature was dropping fast. I'd made $43 after gas, barely enough to survive another day. When the next ride request popped up, Airport Terminal 2 to downtown, I almost ignored it. It was a 45-minute drive in bad weather, and my tank was nearly empty. But something told me to accept. "One more day," I whispered. "Just survive one more day." That had become my prayer. As I drove, I passed old clients' properties, yards I used to design, gardens I once sculpted with care. Now they were maintained by someone else. Success to failure was fast in this city, but from failure to forgotten? Even faster. I had no idea that in less than an hour, one passenger would change everything. Henry Whitmore stood outside Terminal 2, cane in hand, looking like a man carved out of dignity. His coat was cashmere, his shoes Italian leather, his silver hair perfectly combed despite the wind. But his eyes looked lost. "Thank you for coming out in this weather," he said, gently patting my shoulder as I loaded his small, vintage suitcase. "I know it couldn't have been easy." We drove mostly in silence for the first 10 minutes, just the rhythm of the wipers and the rain filling the space between us. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "What brought you to driving, son?" No one had ever asked that, not like that. "My business failed," I admitted. "Family company. Landscaping. My dad started it from nothing. I tried to expand. Borrowed too much, too soon. Lost everything." Henry nodded slowly, staring out at the wet highway. After a long silence, he said, "My son tried to expand our family business once too. Pharmaceutical distribution. I told him to wait, but he didn't." He swallowed hard. "That was 37 years ago." Then he said the date. October 15, 1987. His voice cracked as he spoke. "He died the next day. Motorcycle accident. Angry, reckless. I never forgave myself for the things I said before he left." I glanced in the mirror, and for a heartbeat, I saw something break inside him. He pulled out his phone, scrolling with shaking fingers until he found a photo. "This was him," he said quietly. The young man in the picture could have been me, same jawline, same dark eyes, same stubborn energy. "His name was Brian Whitmore," Henry said. "He'd be about your age now." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Henry leaned forward. "You have his eyes." The car went quiet again, just the rain tapping against the glass. Neither of us realized that conversation, that ride, was the start of something neither of us could have prepared for. Because by the time I dropped him off downtown, fate had already rewritten both our lives. We drove through the storm in silence for a while. The city blurred behind sheets of rain, and the only sound was the hum of the tires slicing through puddles. Then Henry spoke again, almost to himself. "My son and I fought that night. He threw his birthday gift across my office, a Rolex I'd engraved with the words, 'Patience builds empires.' He told me I never believed in him, that I was too busy protecting the company to see he could have taken it further." He paused, then whispered, "He was right." The air in the car felt heavy, like every drop of rain carried regret. I didn't know what to say. So, I just drove. At a red light on Michigan Avenue, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. His hand trembled as he looked at it. "I wrote this for him," he murmured. "Every year since he died, I've rewritten it, but I've never read it at his grave. 37 years, and I've never found the courage." "Why now?" I asked quietly. He looked out the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. "Because the doctor says I have 3 weeks left. Pancreatic cancer. Apparently, my body was rotting while I was still signing merger contracts." My chest tightened. I didn't know what to say to that either. He smiled faintly, like he could read my thoughts. "I've spent my life building something no one wants to inherit. I have no one left, Ethan. No wife, no children. Just numbers in bank accounts and my name on office doors." The words hit me like a confession. He continued, "I have money, but no one to leave it to. Not one person who remembers the man, just the tycoon." His laugh was weak, bitter. "Do you know what it's like to be the richest man in an empty house?" I shook my head. "No, sir. But I know what it's like to wake up every morning feeling like a ghost in your own life." Henry turned to look at me. "I believe you do." He reached into his jacket again, pulled out a leather checkbook, and began writing. His handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "You don't have to," I started, but he cut me off. "This isn't about money," he said firmly. "It's about gratitude. About recognition. You listened to me. You didn't try to fix my pain or fill the silence with empty words. Most people can't sit with another man's regrets." He tore out the check and folded it twice before handing it to me. "Promise me you won't look at it until you're home. And promise me one more thing, that you'll call your father tonight. Whatever's between you two, fix it before you run out of time." I swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." His eyes softened, but his voice grew urgent. "You're lucky, Ethan. Your father is still alive. He's still breathing. Mine's gone. My son's gone. Don't make the mistake I did, waiting until there's only ghosts left to talk to." I nodded, though my throat was tight. When we reached the Langford Hotel downtown, the bellhop rushed out with an umbrella, but Henry waved him off and let me carry his suitcase. As he stood under the golden awning, the rain dripping from his coat, he gripped my hand with both of his. "Do you know the cruelest thing about success?" he asked. I shook my head. He smiled sadly. You spend your whole life building something you can't take with you, while the things you could take, love, forgiveness, time, you spend too early. He squeezed my hand one last time. Don't waste your years, son. Don't wait 37 like I did. Then he walked inside, leaving me standing in the rain with that folded check and a business card that simply read, Henry Whitmore, Whitmore Holdings, Chicago, Illinois. That night, I sat in my car behind the Target lot again, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The city lights blurred through my windshield like distant stars. I pulled the check from my pocket and unfolded it. $20,000. My breath caught. The handwriting was jagged but bold. $20,000, for a conversation. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I reached for my phone and called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. Ethan? I froze. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Hey, Dad, I whispered. I just needed to say. I love you. He paused. Are you okay, son? And just like that, the dam broke. I told him everything, about the ride, the check, the old man, the guilt that had been eating me alive. I cried so hard I could barely get the words out. I'm coming, he said simply. Where are you? 2 hours later, my father's truck pulled into the lot. He didn't say anything when he got out, he just hugged me. For the first time in years, I let myself cry in his arms, not as a failed businessman, but as his son. When I woke up the next morning at his house in Naperville, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, there was no crushing weight on my chest. That peace lasted about 10 minutes. At 6:12 a.m., my phone rang again. An unknown number. Mr. Mercer? This is Gregory Langston, Mr. Whitmore's attorney. I sat up immediately. Yes? There was a pause. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Mr. Whitmore passed away last night in his sleep. The hotel staff found him this morning. The room tilted. What? But I just dropped him off yesterday. I know, Gregory said gently. It was peaceful. He made some urgent changes to his will last night. He specifically asked for you to be contacted. I couldn't process the words. The man I'd driven less than 24 hours earlier, the man who'd told me to call my dad, was gone. Please come to my office this morning, the lawyer continued. Mr. Whitmore's instructions concern you directly. The drive downtown felt like a dream. My dad insisted on coming along. Neither of us spoke much, he just rested a hand on my shoulder as we drove. The check, still uncashed, sat in my wallet like a heartbeat. Whitmore's firm was in one of those buildings that looked more like a museum than an office, marble floors, brass railings, city views stretching forever. Gregory met us in the reception area. His tie was slightly loosened, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. Mr. Whitmore called me at 8 p.m. last night, he said quietly. He insisted we update his will immediately. When I told him it could wait, he said, I've already waited 37 years too long. He gestured for us to sit. When he opened the folder in front of him, the words that came out of his mouth didn't feel real. Mr. Whitmore left you his entire estate, $87 million, properties in 7 states, and full ownership of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. My dad's hand gripped my arm as if to anchor me to reality. That can't be right, I said. We met yesterday. It must be a mistake. Gregory shook his head slowly. It isn't. And before you say anything else, he left you this letter, written by hand, just hours before he passed. He asked me to read it to you personally. Gregory unfolded a single sheet of stationery, cream paper, neat cursive handwriting. He cleared his throat and began. Ethan, you'll want to refuse this. But before you do, you need to know something. When my son died, my wife and I hired a private investigator to understand the life he'd been living in his final weeks. We discovered he had been seeing a young woman, Sarah Mercer, who worked at a flower shop near his apartment. She was 19. She was pregnant when he died. My dad sat forward sharply. Sarah Mercer, my father's younger sister. My aunt. For a few seconds, the room was dead silent. My father leaned forward, his knuckles white on the armrest. Sarah, he said softly. My sister Sarah? Gregory nodded and kept reading the letter. She disappeared after Brian's funeral. We searched for years but never found her. She changed her number, moved out of state, and vanished. My wife, Eleanor, never forgave herself for giving up the search. We told ourselves it was best to let her grieve in peace. But we were wrong. I felt the air thicken in my lungs. I'd heard of Aunt Sarah growing up, the quiet one, the one who worked at a florist shop downtown and then suddenly disappeared. My dad never talked about her much. Just said she had her reasons. Gregory continued. Yesterday afternoon, after our car ride, I asked my investigator to run one more search. With today's technology, it took only hours to find her record. She died in 2005. But before that, she gave birth to a son, born June 18, 1988. The birth certificate lists the father as Brian Whitmore. My heart dropped. Gregory looked up from the paper. Ethan, that son, was you. The room blurred. My chest went cold, like the ground had vanished beneath me. That's not possible, I whispered. My father, Tom. Gregory shook his head gently. Tom raised you as his own. But according to every record, biologically, you were Brian Whitmore's child. I turned to my father. He was staring at the floor, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy. Dad? He nodded slowly. Sarah was 19. She showed up one night crying. Told me she'd made a mistake, that the boy she loved was gone. She said she was pregnant. Our parents were gone by then, and she begged me not to tell anyone. She didn't want to ruin his family's name. He took a deep breath, his voice cracking. So I raised you as my own, Ethan. She signed the papers and disappeared 2 months later. I thought she'd found peace. I never wanted you to feel like less than my son. Because you are my son. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed or grateful. Gregory went back to the letter. I confirmed everything yesterday afternoon. But that isn't the reason I changed my will. You could have taken advantage of me. You could have asked for money, or pity, or help. But you didn't. You just listened. You showed compassion to an old man drowning in his regrets. You reminded me of what my son might have been, someone capable of love and empathy, even in failure. My hands shook. The world felt heavy and light at the same time. You are family, Ethan. You carry the eyes, the heart, and the stubbornness of my boy. I leave you everything I built, not as charity, but as an apology to both of you. Maybe, through you, I can finally give Brian what I never could, forgiveness. Gregory stopped reading. The silence in that office was louder than thunder. My dad rubbed his forehead, then stood abruptly and walked to the window. His reflection in the glass looked older than I'd ever seen him. She never told me who the father was, he whispered. Not once. All those years, and she carried that secret alone. I stood up, walking toward him slowly. Dad. He turned and hugged me. Hard. Doesn't change a damn thing, he said, voice thick with emotion. You're still my son. Always have been. That broke me. Completely. We stood there for a long time, father and son, by blood and by choice, trying to make sense of 37 years of silence. 3 weeks later, I was on a flight to Portland, Oregon to meet a man named Sean Matthews, the son of Brian Whitmore's other child, meaning, my half-nephew. He'd been found through Henry's investigator, and Gregory had arranged the introduction. When I saw Sean sitting in the coffee shop, broad-shouldered, brown-eyed, a faint scar on his chin that looked just like mine, I froze. He stood up, smiling nervously. You must be Ethan. I nodded. And you must be the reason my life suddenly makes sense. We both laughed awkwardly, then sat down. He stirred his coffee slowly. I always wondered why my mom never talked about her family. My adoptive parents were incredible, but I could tell something haunted her. Guess I finally know what. I smiled sadly. Sometimes the truth takes generations to find the light. We talked for hours. About Henry. About his letter. About how strange it felt to discover a connection neither of us asked for but both desperately needed. When I showed him a photo of Henry taken the day we met, Sean's eyes filled with tears. He had that look, he said. Like he'd been holding his breath for decades. I nodded. He finally exhaled. The following week, we both stood at Henry's funeral in Chicago. The church was overflowing with executives, employees, politicians, all people who'd known Henry as a legend. But among them, we were the only ones there as family. I gave the eulogy. I drove Henry for 40 minutes, I began. And in that time, he taught me more about life than most people learn in decades. He reminded me that failure isn't final. That forgiveness is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. When I finished, Sean stood beside me and said, he wasn't just your passenger. He was your beginning. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the service, Gregory handed me a small envelope. Inside was another note, written by Henry the morning we met. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to let go. Don't let money become your monument. Let it be your bridge back to the people you love. Every failure is just a paused success waiting for forgiveness. I folded that note and placed it in my wallet, right next to his business card. Over the next few months, I made a decision that felt like the only right thing to do. I used part of the inheritance to launch the Whitmore Mercer Foundation, a fund for small business owners who'd gone under but were too proud or too scared to start again. Not handouts. Just second chances. My brother, Caleb, ran the operations side. The first time I showed him the proposal, he stared at me for a full minute before speaking. You're really gonna use $87 million to help people who messed up like us? I smiled. Exactly. He hugged me then, the first time in years. Within 2 years, we'd helped over 300 struggling families restart. A bakery in Detroit that nearly closed after a flood. A roofing company in Duluth whose owner was diagnosed with cancer. A small flower shop in Bloomington, run by a single mom who reminded me of Aunt Sarah. It felt like coming full circle. My dad and I have dinner every Sunday now. He planted a rose garden behind his house, wild, untamed, and beautiful. He calls it Henry's Patch. Sometimes Sean visits with his kids. They run between the flowers, laughing, unaware of the ghosts watching over them. It's a garden of forgiveness, grown from roots deeper than blood. One afternoon, Gregory called again. "Ethan," he said, "there's one more thing." Apparently, Henry had left behind a short note, scribbled the morning he took that Uber ride with me. I drove to his office and read it quietly to myself. If you ever wonder why life puts strangers in your path, remember this: some of them are just family wearing different faces. Every ending is simply a new beginning, waiting for brave hands to build it. I folded the note and smiled through tears. I still drive Uber once a week. Early mornings. Airport runs mostly. It keeps me grounded, reminds me where I came from and how fast life can change. One Thursday, a woman climbed into the back seat, eyes red from crying. She told me her restaurant had gone under, that she'd disappointed her parents who'd given up everything to help her open it. I listened. No advice, no judgment. Just listened. When we reached her stop, I handed her a card. "The Whitmore Mercer Foundation," she read. "What is this?" "Someone once gave me a second chance," I said. "Now it's my turn." She smiled faintly. "Why would you help a stranger?" I looked at her through the rearview mirror. Because strangers aren't always strangers. Sometimes they're family you haven't met yet. 3 years later, the greenhouse my father and I rebuilt stood proudly on the same land where my business once collapsed. The first time I walked through its doors, the smell of fresh soil hit me, and I nearly broke down. The glass panes reflected everything I'd lost, and everything I'd somehow regained. Dad stood beside me, wiping his hands on his old denim jacket. "You remember when we planted that oak, back in '03, he asked. I smiled. How could I forget? We buried Mom's old gardening gloves under it. He nodded, his voice thick. "Now we'll plant another. For Henry. For Brian. For Sarah. For everyone who didn't get to see how this story turned out." We placed a bronze plaque under that tree a week later. It read, "For Henry and Brian Whitmore, proof that forgiveness grows deeper than blood." The Whitmore Mercer Foundation kept expanding. Caleb handled operations, Dad oversaw community outreach, and I worked directly with people who came to us for help: the broken, the bankrupt, the ones who'd lost hope but still had fight in their eyes. I saw myself in each of them. There was Rick, a single father who'd lost his auto shop in a fire. We helped him rebuild, not just the business, but his confidence. Then there was Tina, who ran a small cafe that went under during a rent hike. We helped her relocate, remodel, and reopen. She still sends us cookies every Christmas. Each success story felt like a seed sprouting in a garden Henry had unknowingly planted decades earlier. Sometimes I'd drive out to the greenhouse late at night, sit under the oak tree, and think about that car ride, the rain, his trembling hands, the way he'd said, "You remind me of someone I lost." Back then, I thought it was just coincidence. Now, I knew it was something else. Something bigger. I kept driving Uber on Thursday mornings, not for the money, but for perspective. It reminded me that the most ordinary moments could hold extraordinary beginnings. One morning, I picked up a man in his late 50s. He was wearing a cheap suit, clutching a folder like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. "How's your morning going?" I asked. He gave a short, tired laugh. "Trying to sell my business before the bank takes it. 15 years down the drain." I smiled softly. Sometimes what looks like the end is just a beginning in disguise. He frowned at first, but by the time I dropped him off, I'd slipped a card into his hand, the same white card Henry once gave me. He looked down. "The Whitmore Mercer Foundation?" I nodded. "We specialize in second chances." He blinked back tears. "You don't even know me." I smiled. "That's the point." That night, I found myself flipping through Henry's final letters again. There was one I hadn't shared before, short, written in uneven handwriting, dated the morning before he died. "Ethan, I never believed in destiny until the day I met you. I used to think fate was something people invented to make sense of tragedy. But now I know it's simply two broken roads crossing at the right moment. I don't regret dying. I regret waiting 37 years to let my heart forgive. Promise me you won't wait that long for anything, not love, not hope, not peace. Henry." I stared at that letter for a long time, the ink slightly smudged from age. Then I placed it beside a photo of him, sitting in the back seat of my car, smiling faintly, unaware that in a few hours, he'd be gone. Every week, the Foundation's office received dozens of letters, people writing to thank us for believing in them when no one else did. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Angela, who ran a flower shop in Bloomington. She'd lost everything after a flood but reopened with our help. Her handwriting was elegant, her words full of gratitude. I don't know who this Whitmore was, but I feel like I owe him my life. Every rose I sell reminds me that beauty always grows from the ruins. Reading that, I felt something shift in me. It hit me that maybe this was the true inheritance, not the money, not the business, but the ability to help others rise again. My brother and I eventually expanded the Foundation's work into educational grants for children of failed entrepreneurs, scholarships for kids whose parents had lost everything but refused to give up. When we launched the program, I thought about Penny. She was 10 now, living with Mara in Dallas. We weren't a perfect family, but we'd started talking again. Video calls on Sundays. She'd show me her art projects, and I'd tell her about the greenhouse and the oak tree. "Can I visit one day?" she asked once. "You can visit anytime," I said. "It's your story too." And it was. That winter, I hosted a small memorial event at the greenhouse. Snow dusted the glass roof, and the air inside smelled like pine and soil. I invited everyone who'd ever been touched by the Foundation, business owners, families, even employees. Sean flew in from Portland with his wife and kids. When he stood in front of the crowd, he said something that still echoes in my head. "I used to think family was just blood. Then I met Ethan, and I learned it's also about the people who show up when you're broken." People cried. I did too. Because that was the truth Henry had been trying to tell me all along, that family isn't always the people you start with. Sometimes, it's the people who arrive when your world collapses and decide to stay. After the event, I walked outside. The night sky was clear, the air sharp and cold. The oak tree stood tall, branches glittering with snow under the lights. My father walked up beside me, his breath fogging in the air. "You did good, son," he said quietly. I looked at him and smiled. "No, we did." He chuckled, shoving his hands in his coat pockets. "You know what Mom would have said?" "What?" "She'd say it took a whole damn forest of second chances to grow this one tree." We both laughed softly, our breath rising like ghosts disappearing into the night. That evening, when everyone left, I stayed behind. I sat beneath the oak tree with Henry's letter in my hand, tracing the faded ink with my thumb. "I kept your promise," I whispered. "And I didn't wait 37 years. The wind rustled through the leaves above me, a soft, approving sigh. Back in my car, I glanced at the old photo taped to my dashboard, Henry's business card beside a picture of Dad and me standing in front of the rebuilt greenhouse. On the back of Henry's card, in small, neat handwriting, he had written, "Every ending is just a beginning, waiting for brave enough hands to build it." I smiled, started the engine, and whispered into the night, "I'll keep building, Henry. I promise." It's been 5 years since that rainy night that changed everything. 5 years since an old man I'd never met sat in the back of my car, handed me a $20,000 check, and unknowingly rewrote the rest of my life. Sometimes I still think about the odds, how one more declined ride, one more traffic delay, and I never would have met him. But fate doesn't make appointments. It just shows up uninvited, sits quietly in the back seat, and asks if you're ready to listen. And when it does, you'd better say yes. The Whitmore Mercer Foundation had grown far beyond what I'd ever imagined. We expanded to 7 states, offering bridge loans, mentorship programs, and emotional support networks for small business owners crushed under debt and shame. I made sure every applicant who walked through our doors understood something I had to learn the hard way. Failure doesn't define you. It refines you. One morning, as I was reviewing files in my office, Caleb walked in holding a newspaper. "You made the front page," he said, grinning. On the cover was an article. "Man Who Lost Everything Builds Nation's Largest Second Chance Fund." I laughed. Guess they finally found a way to make bankruptcy sound inspiring. Dad poked his head in, smirking. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic." We laughed, the 3 of us, something I hadn't thought we'd ever do again. Later that evening, I took a walk through the greenhouse. The late spring air was warm, the oak tree's leaves whispering in the gentle wind. Children were playing among the flower beds, some of the families we'd helped, their laughter bouncing off the glass walls. Sean and his wife were there too, visiting from Oregon. He'd started a similar nonprofit out west, a mentorship program for young adults aging out of foster care. "You know," he said, watching the kids run, "I think Henry would have been proud of you." I smiled. "No," I said quietly. "He'd be proud of us." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. After everyone left, I sat alone beneath the oak tree. The greenhouse lights cast a soft golden glow over the grass. Fireflies drifted lazily, their light flickering like memories refusing to die out. I pulled out my wallet and looked at Henry's business card, the same one he'd handed me that night, still slightly creased, the ink faded around the edges. On the back, his handwriting read, "Don't let money be your monument. Let love and forgiveness do the building." I smiled through the tears. "You did, Henry. You built it through me." I started speaking at local colleges, not as a businessman, but as a man who had once lost everything. I'd tell them, you can rebuild the business, the home, the bank account. But rebuilding your faith in yourself, that's the real miracle. I'd show them photos of the foundation, of Dad, of Caleb, and of Sean's kids running through the rose garden. And every time, without fail, I'd finish with Henry's story. An old man once told me, I'd say, that the cruelest thing about success is realizing too late that you built walls instead of bridges. He gave me both the bridge and the courage to cross it. The audience would always go quiet then, the kind of silence that means the heart is listening. One Thursday morning, I got another Uber ping. I hadn't driven in months, but I still kept the app active, a quiet reminder of where it all began. The pickup location, Midway Airport. Destination, Oak Park. I accepted. A young woman in her late 20s climbed in. Her eyes were red, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "You okay?" I asked gently. She hesitated. "Just a rough week. My dad passed. I'm trying to figure out what to do with the business he left behind. It's drowning in debt. Everyone keeps telling me to sell." I looked at her through the mirror. "What kind of business?" "Landscaping," she said quietly. "He built it from nothing." I smiled. "You know, I used to run one of those." Yeah. Lost it. Lost everything, actually. But life has a way of giving things back, just not in the way you expect. When we reached her stop, she started to get out, but I stopped her. I reached into the glove compartment and handed her a card. "The Whitmore Mercer Foundation," she read aloud. I nodded. "Call them. Tell them Ethan sent you." She frowned. "Why?" "Because sometimes, strangers are just family waiting to be found." Her eyes softened. She tucked the card into her purse and smiled faintly. "Thank you." As she walked away, the early morning sun broke through the clouds, and for a brief moment, I could almost see Henry standing there, smiling, hat in hand, eyes full of quiet peace. That night, I drove out to the greenhouse again. The oak tree had grown even taller, its branches stretching wide as if embracing the stars. Dad had strung little golden lights through it, and when the wind blew, they shimmered like fireflies. I placed Henry's business card at the base of the tree, beside the bronze plaque. "I hope you know what you started," I whispered. I could almost hear his voice again, calm, amused, wise. "Don't waste your years, son. Don't wait 37 like I did." I smiled through the ache. "I didn't, Henry. I didn't." As I turned to leave, a group of kids ran past, their laughter echoing in the night. One of them tripped, and when I helped him up, he grinned at me and said, "My dad says you help people start over. Is that true?" I chuckled. "That's the goal, buddy." He nodded seriously. "Then you must be really rich." I laughed. "Maybe not in the way you think." He grinned. "My dad says the richest people are the ones who remember what it feels like to be poor." I froze, smiling wide. "Your dad's a smart man." As the boy ran off, I looked back at the oak tree glowing softly behind him. Maybe he was right. Maybe that was the real wealth, remembering. When I finally sat in my car again, I stared out at the greenhouse, the soft lights flickering like old memories breathing. For the first time, I didn't feel like that broken man behind the wheel of a beat-up Civic. I felt whole. I turned on the radio, and a familiar old song came on, one my dad used to hum when we worked together. As the melody filled the silence, I whispered to myself, "Every ending really is just a beginning, if you're brave enough to start again." If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you need to call, someone you need to forgive, or someone who once gave you a second chance, share it. And comment where you're watching from.